But I want to end tonight with just honoring every single one of you. You've all chosen to be here tonight. You could be watching Game of Thrones reruns. You could be watching Trickster, Eden Robinson's show on CBC. And I want to watch Trickster. Don't get me wrong, as we're done, I'm on gems watching. You should all be watching. But you've all chosen to be here tonight, and I wanted to just share a little story with you about our family. So I was born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories. I was born in 1971. Fort Smith is population 2,500. I think that's still correct. Officially quadrangular where I'm from, so Cree, Dene, French are spoken given time. We have buffalo 40 miles one way. We have bison 40 miles one way. We have pelicans. We have sandhill cranes. We have whooping cranes. We got some black bears, brown bears, cinnamon bears, all that get a little to our community. I was told a long time ago, Fort Smith is one of the most wheelchair accessible communities in all of Canada, and we're really proud of that. I've always said we are the Hickey capital of the North. We are the nickname capital of the North. We're the Métis capital of the Northwest Territories. I was really lucky to be born in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories in the 70s and the 80s. One of my earliest memories was I was born on, I think, Field Street or McDougall. I was born on McDougall, but I was raised on Sesame Street. And one of my earliest memories was sleeping in our house on Sesame Street, my little brother in one room, me in the other. Isla, our sisters, would scream their heads off, like scream their heads off every time CBC television showed the Bay City Rollers singing Saturday Night. And I remember growing up to the Tommy Hunter Show and Fraggle Rock and Degrassi Junior High and Sesame Street and Jolly Green Giant, and then much. It was Stu Jeffries. And I remember it was a baby, was how I started making some serious sunya, was babysitting. And I remember when I was a teenager, I used to babysit for Karen and Mr. Bennett, Gary Bennett. And I remember in those days when you sat, you cleaned, never mind the kids, you cleaned all the time. And I remember scrubbing their toilets at about midnight. And I was thinking, boy, I hope those guys dance for a couple hours. I haven't even begun to wash the walls yet. And they'd come home at, 1:30 and they'd be just so thrilled that I was there, because that was spotless. The kids were asleep. Everyone was fed. And I think I got $20. And in those days, man, $20, you were a king. I used to deliver the Slave River Journal and the Edmonton Journal. And I remember when we were sorting the different newspapers, I would look at everyone in Fort Smith, and then at everybody in the Edmonton Journal. So everybody in Fort Smith would be in the Slave River Journal. Everyone would be in Edmonton in the Edmonton Journal. Everybody in Edmonton always looked so much happier than the people in Fort Smith. I don't know if that's true. I was 11 years old. I remember thinking, gee, it must be one big continuous party. And everybody's always smiling. Edmonton, Slave River Journal, not so much. There were some smiles, but man, are we ever political where I'm from. And I miss Fort Smith very much. I used to pump gas for Kelly's gas station. I was the head for quite some. I was also into the RCMP. I helped the policy and procedure manual for the Fort Smith Health Center. You name it, I probably did it. I was also a custodian for the Slave River Journal. And I did try to help Dr. JQ develop some of the photos for the Slave River Journal in the darkroom. And I blew it so badly, I think I was demoted back to just being the custodian. But Fort Smith is where I was born and raised. And I couldn't do what I do as a human being, father, or even as a friend or as a storyteller, and certainly not as a writer, had I not been born and raised in Fort Smith. And tonight, I want to read you a really beautiful story, Falls Fort Smith, and it's based on a true story. But I want to sing you a song. I want to open with a song. So I want to honor my mom. I was just saying to Jonathan that I haven't hugged my mom in over 6 months, and it's really starting to get to me. A phone call doesn't cut it. A text doesn't cut it. FaceTime chat doesn't cut it. You just want to hug your mom sometimes, or give your dad a hug, or hug your buddies and all over. We can't do that now. And there's a good reason for that. And we all know why. But honor my mom, I'll tell you a good story. So a long time, my Auntie Tessa, Jonathan, I don't know if you can put those photos I sent you of my grandparents up on the screen, but my Auntie Tessa McIntosh has the greatest photos of me. She's a professional photographer. She's also my auntie. And she has documented our life in the most beautiful way. She's taken the most gorgeous photos of us as kids, but my grandparents, my mom, baptisms, reunions. Tessa's always there. And one day I was over at Tessa's house in Yellowknife at the Blue Raven, her bed and breakfast. And she looked at me and she said, Richard, this was years ago. She said, did you ever hear your mom sing that one song? It's so beautiful. She said, when my baby Alex was tiny, she had this little lullaby, but at the end there were 3 whistles. Ever hear her song? You got a tape recorder with that song. And I said, no. And she goes, well, maybe she sung it to you when you were a baby. And I said, well, maybe. So I went and I spoke to my mom that night and I said, Mom, Tessa was saying you used to sing this little song with 3 whistles at the end to Alex, her son, your nephew, when he was a baby. And she said, I didn't sing to that boy. And I said, well, she says you sang this song. I didn't sing. If I did, maybe it was something from Sesame Street or ABBA or the Bay City Rollers or something. And so I put that way, it was a mystery. It was an unsolved mystery. So when Roger and his wife found out they're expecting, our whole family was so happy because it was going to be our first grandbaby for Mom. And of course, it was going to be our first niece or nephew for our whole family. He was the first of he and his wife were the first to have babies. And we were so thrilled. And it was actually at that same time my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. So it was such a confusing time because here my mom was fighting for her life. And at the same time, we had this divine gift on the way. And as luck would have it, and as life would have it, and as the universe would have it, and as the creator would have it, we were gifted with a little boy and his name was Shaden. That's my brother's son. That's my first nephew. And it was actually Shaden that saved our mother's life, because I know with everything inside of me that as my mom was fighting cancer, I know she made up her mind and said, oh no, I'm not leaving this planet. I'm not leaving anytime soon. I need to hold my first grandbaby. I need to hold either a little boy or a little girl, and I get to watch this little one grow. And I'm here to tell you, cancer didn't stand a chance. My mom beat it, and I thank Shaden all the time. You're the one that saved our mother's life. So when Shaden was born, I was making my mom some tea one day, and my mom picked up Shaden, the one who saved her life. And she sang this song. I'll sing it to you. It goes like this. She went, so she imagined she's holding little Shaden. He's tiny, maybe 2 months old. She went, na 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 wee 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 na 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 wee wee wee. And I didn't want to scare her. That's usually when I pull out my tape recorder, and I didn't want to wreck it. And I heard her sing this little song to the one who saved her life, little Shaden. And after she was done, she kissed him and put him down and he fell asleep. So then I brought my mom tea. So in Clecho, you say, Lidina Wooni, would you like some tea? You'll hear that in the story. And she said, yes, I would like some tea. And I said, Mom, you just sang a beautiful song to Shaden. And she said, I didn't sing that boy a song. I said, I heard you sing a song to Shaden. No, I don't sing to babies, she said. Must have been ABBA. Must have been Bay City Rollers. So finally now I said, look, I'll sing it back to you, okay? I'm going to sing the song that you just sang. She goes, all right, go ahead and sing your big make-believe song to me. I said, okay. I said, you held Shaden And you went na 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 wee wee, and she went, oh, you know, when I was a little girl in Nishi, Old Fort Ray, she said I was hauling water back to the camp and I was singing a song. And my mother, your Ehtsèe, your grandma, came rushing out of the house and she stood in front of me and she put the water down that I was carrying and she said, my girl, who gave you that song? That's not our song. That's not a family song. And she said, oh, Mom, the spiders gave me that song. Isn't that something? And my grandmother said, I don't want you to sing that song because we don't know those people. You have to be very careful with songs. That's not our family song. So all these years, my mom, who of course held all four of us boys and has held Vika and Shaden, our little niece and nephew, and now Radley, I want you to know, I think I just sang you a song that the spiders gave to my mother. Isn't that something? I really wanted to honor you for being here tonight. So how could I not sing to you? I want to read you a little story from Moccasin Square Gardens. This is my latest book. I really want to thank my publisher, Douglas and McIntyre. We hadn't done a book together in 23 years. My first book with Douglas and McIntyre, my very first book was The Lesser Blessed. And it came out in 1996, and my editor was Barbara Pulling. And that was the first time I ever met a surgeon and somebody who really dwelled on what I wanted to do. And I think I'm an okay writer. It's actually my editors that make me the writer that I am to this day. So when Anna O'Keefe took over at Douglas and McIntyre, she got in touch with me and she said, what are you working on right now? And I said, oh, I'm working on a short story collection called Moccasin Square Gardens, because in Fort Smith, Northwest Territories, we have a dance hall called the Roaring Rapids Hall, but people call it Moccasin Square Gardens. And I wanted to honor Fort Smith. And she says, we'll publish it, we'll take it. How'd you like to work with Barbara Pulling? I hadn't worked with Barbara Pulling in 23 years. And I'm here to tell you, she's only gotten tougher. She's only gotten deeper in what she does. And she doesn't use Google Docs or Microsoft Word. She uses a pencil. And when she sent me my corrections, I thought, oh, we'll be done in 3 weeks. It took me 3 months to go through the corrections to get Moccasin Square Gardens to where it is today. And after she was done with me, they gave me to Cheryl Cohen. And Cheryl was the books editor for the Globe and Mail. And Cheryl just laid the boots to me just as much as Barbara Pulling did. And I am so grateful to them both. So I want to dedicate this reading tonight to my dear brother, Johnny, and his wife-to-be, Heather. They're getting married this Saturday in Victoria, British Columbia. And of course, we're living in a time of a global pandemic. So out of respect for everyone, we're not going to go. We can't take the risk of getting anybody sick. So we're going to be watching it this Saturday at 1:30 in the afternoon here in Edmonton. It's also my wife's birthday this Saturday. So I just want to honor everybody. I really want to thank you for logging in. I hope you can hear me okay. This is called Ehtsèe Grandpa. So everybody, get yourself a drink, something warm or something bubbly. I've got water. I've already had way too much coffee today. I want you to sit back, relax, and let me read to you one of the most profound gifts I've ever been given as a story. You know, when a story visits you, and I'm sure Patty K. Hamilton can testify, it's like being struck by the sweetest lightning. And this is an example of something that I couldn't have even imagined ever writing, but I did. And it's with Cheryl Cohen and Barbara Pulling and Douglas and McIntyre's help that I was able to do this. So this is called Ehtsèe, or Ehtsèe Grandpa. So Ehtsèe is how we say grandpa in Tlicho Dene. Here we go. The time I showed my Ehtsèe the movie E.T., it was years ago. He was in on his own from Betchoko, getting a checkup. My grandmother was, well, they had had a disagreement. It was summer. My mom's house was quiet, peaceful. She'd worked hard to rebuild her life after she and her boyfriend separated. There were rumors Patrick was having an affair. He denied it up and down, but Mum had the sense. So she decided to take a job in Yellowknife, 8 hours north from Fort Smith. The idea was for Patrick and her to take some time to think about what was going to happen next. Patrick and I had gotten along great for the past 9 years. I just couldn't imagine him cheating. The situation was so unbelievable that I wasn't sure what to do. But I did know my mom needed help around the new house she was renting. It was weird because our family had built a log home when we were all together. My question was, why did Patrick get to stay in our family's log house, which my father had built with his bare hands? All of this was why I'd chosen Yellowknife for the summer as a part-time student researcher with the Dene National Office, to help my mom and be closer to my grandparents. Ehtsèe and Ehtsèe lived an hour and 35 minutes down the road in Fort Ray. Betchoko, as they were calling it now, or perhaps as it had always been named. I was watching Oprah after spending the day raking, bagging leaves, and tidying up my mom's yard. I'd had a toke and was feeling buzzed. There was a knock on the door. I went around the corner, and there, through the curtains, was the perfect silhouette of my grandfather, puffing his little pipe. Ehtsèe, said with breath, said with respect. Ehtsèe, the miracle worker, the medicine man, the chanter, the holy man. Grandpa was looking away as if listening to something. I ran back, grabbed my camera, snuck up on the perfect portrait, and took it. I answered the door after putting my camera down. It will always be the greatest picture of our lifetime together. Tlicho. He spoke what they used to call us, dog rib. He said my mother's name, and I told him she was at work, that she'd be home soon. He stood there looking away. He folded his hands around his pipe before sliding it into his jacket pocket. I never saw him light that pipe, not once. He just liked the taste of it, I guess. It was made of either clay or red willow. I never saw it up close. It was rumored that was where he kept his medicine power. Lidina Wuni, I asked him. Would you like some tea? Ehtsèe, he said and came in. It took him forever to take off his moccasin rubbers, and I could smell bush smoke on him. Nizi, I asked him, are you good? Ehtsèe, he said. Good, he said in English. We were from worlds apart, yet his blood flowed through mine. I was proud to be his grandson. He looked so small without my Ehtsèe. How I remember the difference in the words is with Ehtsèe for grandma. I always think the final E sound is stronger than the final A sound in Ehtsèe. Just like owls and ravens, the female is always stronger, bigger. That's how my grandparents were. My grandmother was cheeky, tough, firm, yet she cried when we arrived for a visit, and she cried when we were leaving. She'd kiss our hands and bow, kiss our hands and bow, kiss our hands. I motioned for my grandfather to have a seat in the living room, said that I would call my mum. Maybe her boss would let her leave early. I put the water on to boil. My grandfather sat in my mum's living room on the big couch and looked up at all the photos, my sister, my dad, so many pictures of my mum with Patrick, her hope for them as a couple, all over the room. It was like she was manifesting their happiness. And there were pictures of Grandpa, Ehtsèe, them together, our uncles, all the art, all the plants, the books, the TV. I tried calling my mom's office, but she had moved to another department and no one could find her number. It was lame. I had rented E.T. the night before from the Yellowknife Library. my favorite place on earth, along with the loft my father had built for me in the log house. I wanted to watch the movie again and see if it had stood the test of time. After a minute, I hit play, and it started. I motioned to my grandfather that a good movie was coming on. He crossed his legs, squinted, and sat back to watch the film that had changed my life forever. He watched intently, but he kept looking right. It was as if he'd forgotten that my grandmother wasn't there beside him. I decided to make toast and butter and jam for my grandfather. We had no dry meat left. My mom and I were mooches who showed up in Betchoko and usually took a big brown bag of it home. As I prepared his tea, I thought of him in the next room. He'd lost his entire family decades ago, and as a young boy, an orphan, made his way through the Mackenzie Mountains to be with the Tlicho, the dog rib. He was a mountain dene. He and his dog found their way together, and when they got to Tlicho territory, they were met by guards. TB and influenza were killing many dene. My Ehtsèe was not welcome at first, but he explained where he was from, and they asked him how long it had taken him to travel there. He told them, and the guards looked at each other. They did not believe that you could make it through to the barren lands in that short a time. I will show you, Ehtsèe told them, me and my dog. And he did. The route shaved off 2 extra days of travel for the Tlicho, and that is why we have our family name, Si. It means mountain. I had also heard that my grandfather performed many miracles when he was young. He took a hunter's appendix out with his knife. He cured a stutterer. He tied a man's mouth shut over a distance, a man who was spreading lies about us as a family. And now here we were, together, watching E.T. From time to time, he would point to the TV, and I could tell he wanted to ask me questions. I did my best to answer using sign language. As happy as I was, I felt that old soul ache of not being fluent in Tlicho. I had about 80 words in me, but I wasn't conversational. Being fluent was my dream. It was always my dream. I was so worried about our language, but I was raised away from the Tlicho, and we never spoke it at home. Grandpa cried when he thought E.T. was going to die. I cried too. We took turns blowing our noses into Kleenex. I kept the movie running so we could each maintain our dignity. At the end, my grandfather was so happy. When the credits came on, he gave me a thumbs up and smiled. Nizi, he said. I helped him into the bathroom, and then I helped him out onto our porch and settled him in a chair. He tasted his pipe, and I made him more tea. I asked him if he was hungry. He wrinkled his nose and shook his head. Good movie, he said. Good boy. Good friend. I almost started crying again. He tried asking me questions about my life, but I didn't know if I answered correctly. He nodded, watching me, watching me, watching me. My grandpa. I showed him my portraits of elders from different nations, all the children too. I carry my portfolio around for clients, for him to see the button blankets, the Sundance makers, the matriarchs, the braids, the beautiful brown skin, the veterans, the pride. He patted my shoulder and nodded. Nizi, he said, Nizi. I told him that I was working on my master's at UBC and that the people there were strong. The Musqueam. I told him I was helping out a lot with ceremonies on campus, sweat lodges. I said I was getting ready to go into the lodge when I returned. I saw him stop nodding, and he looked at me in a new way. My mom came home, and soon after that, my uncle showed up. They drove my Ehtsèe the hour and 35 minutes that it takes to return to Betchoko. That night, my mother woke me up to say that Grandma was on the phone. She had a message for me from Grandpa, which my mom translated. Grandpa says you are not to go into the sweat lodge because that is not our way. That medicine is from the south. When you go in, they wrap a blanket around you. The more times you go in, the more blankets. If Grandpa ever has to work on you, even from the other side, he will have to take off those blankets and he could lose time. He could lose you trying to take those blankets off, grandson. I nodded as my mum passed on my grandma's message. I listened and understood. You can help, my grandma relayed through my mum. Help them with the fire, the water, but you must not go in. You are our grandson. Will you listen? I nodded. Say it, my mum said. I will not go in, I said. She and her mum spoke Tlicho, and then my mum hung up. How come my dad told her you showed him a movie about a mushroom who helped a boy? She asked me. A mushroom? I asked. Yes, she said. She looked very serious. I started laughing. It was E.T. What? She said. Why did you show him that movie? Because you never gave me your new work number, I said. I had no choice. Then she started laughing too. Know how to say mushroom in Tlicho? She asked. Doodly. It means squirrel food or frog house. I could have asked why she never taught my sister and me Tlicho, but I didn't. I knew that we had been raised in Smith because of the drinking and violence and chaos in Betchoko. In Smith, we were raised with the Cree, the Chipewyan, the French, the Gwich'in, the Inuit, the Slavey, and other friends from across Canada. We had had a happy upbringing. We built our own log house as a family. I think that was our proudest achievement. Well, and we partied tamely. We were proud of that too. I was happy for a long time after that because I felt like my grandfather had heard me. He'd understood. I was happy he thought of E.T. when he thought of me. I was so proud I'd shown him the portraits I was taking. Even so, to my shame, I did not see him or my Ehtsèe again that summer. I was caught up with work in the small capital city of Yellowknife, the cookouts in Mum's backyard, my weed. My uncles were always in competition to help Grandpa because it was rumored that my Ehtsèe was going to choose soon who to pass his medicine on to when he crossed over. The only problem was that my uncles drank hard. One by one, they were losing their families by getting kicked out. One or another would show up at Mom's door at 4 a.m. asking for money and a coffee. Sometimes my mom let them in. Sometimes we waited them out. As time went on, I got interested in becoming an archivist. I would devote my life to archiving and helping the people, I decided. I would be able to share recordings from elders I had interviewed years or decades before. I kept taking portraits and I started selling my services. I'd move into a community for a month or two and archive, photograph, interview community members, leaders, and elders. I loved it. I was positive that this was why I was born. When the invitation came for me to be the Tlicho archivist in residence, I jumped at the chance. I was in a disastrous relationship at the time, abusive. Holy cow, Harmony just dragged me right out. I had little left of myself, but this was my chance. Harmony helped me pack, and I think we both knew I was never coming back. My stories had no power with her or her family or her friends. No one had time for them. I could tell she didn't believe half of what I shared about the North, my family, what I was hoping could be ours. By the time I left, I was soul sick. I felt my old self returning with every smile I gained on my return to Yellowknife. I had a week there before my 2 months in Betchoko. My mom was overjoyed that I was free. She'd seen me vanish in that relationship with Harmony, had heard it in my voice when she called. Now that I was in my mom's new home, I relaxed into her couch, her cooking, her laughter. The North was going to cure me. My clothes didn't fit me anymore. I didn't fit in the world. I'd always enjoyed my pot, but over time I'd become a gentle slave to it. I knew exactly how many days I had left in my stash, how many joints, how many puffs, how many. When I first got high as a teenager, my tongue used to tingle. I used to wait for that, hope for it, ride it out, let it take its time. Now my tongue just felt fat. Explain that, someone. The tingle was gone, and I missed it. When I moved to Betchoko, I had a mild panic attack. Where would I buy my weed when I ran out? It was such a small town, and I didn't want anyone to know I puffed. I detested the idea of going to Yellowknife to score, when all I wanted was to stay still and breathe in as much Tlicho, everything as I could. My time there was my chance to become conversational, and I did my best. Ja for snow, Gocho for ancestors, Adu for I'm scared. Baby steps. The work was pretty simple. I lived in a teacher's house, fully furnished. She was down south on maternity leave, and I interviewed elders and took portraits of the kids and elders and teachers. At night, I would upload the portraits along with each person's signed permission and transcribe the interviews I'd done. Holy cow, it was fun. I learned a lot. I learned about protocol for handling caribou bones and hide. I learned about the Chipewyan Dog Rib War and how the leaders of Quechua and Edsèe had made peace together at Marion Lake. I recorded stories like how Frog brought winter for everyone, the time the Blue Jay and Whiskey Jack traded wives, and a heartbreaking story about why we need to listen to our parents when they tell us to work or move quickly. I had no idea we believed in reincarnation. I learned from other elders about a game that my grandfather used to play where he dressed up in a mask and chased people. It was a ceremony I wrote down called Zekwi. The ceremony was so scary the priest had tried to forbid it, but the people continued the game in secret. My grandfather and grandmother were out on the land when I started my term in Betchoko at Stag River. I couldn't wait to see them, to record them, to take their portraits, to share time. Most of the junior elders I photographed would ask me the same question. Has your grandpa decided yet who gets his medicine? I thought it curious. Most elders didn't ask me that. It was the younger generation who did. I'd shrug. Oh, I'm not too sure. I did hear rumors about my uncles arguing over who had been the best son. Yet, and I hate to say it, these were the same uncles I'd see drinking, stumbling on wobbly legs at 6 a.m., either in Betchoko or out on the streets in Yellowknife. Booze was eating my family alive. That's why I didn't drink. I never had. One thing I learned in community discussions, and a thing that worried me, was that the Bathurst caribou numbers had dwindled from hundreds of thousands to only 19,000. We were down to a system where we hunted with tags. The majority of northern leaders agreed this was the best way to manage the herd. Yet, there was still poaching and worse, the wasting of meat by our own people. I had heard a long time earlier that the Cree say when you break a treaty with the animals, like you make them suffer or you waste the gift of them, what comes doesn't come for you, it comes for your children. As the weeks passed, I could see my payments were not coming from the band. At first I thought maybe there was a hold-on payment, but after 3 weeks my visa was maxed out and I was running low on my weed supply. I had $36 in my wallet, that was it. This was me. And when I didn't have my 3 daily puffs, I got achy, snappy, dazed. F this, I thought one morning, after I'd been checking my bank account, 100 times a day. If they're not gonna pay me, I'm taking the rest of the day off. I decided to make a run to Yellowknife. And who did I see on the highway waiting for me outside of Betchoko? My grandparents. Oh dear, I thought. As happy as I was to see them, I had heard stories from my uncles about the scenarios they were capable of in terms of their elderly demands. I knew that if I picked them up, it would be bingo, Walmart, KFC, more bingo, church, A&W, back to bingo, possibly paying for them at the Super 8 for a night, plus bags and bags of groceries that I'd have to pay for, along with meals out all day, all weekend. My mom was visiting friends in Fort Providence, and she had both of her house keys. I had no money. I was going through withdrawal. A headache was starting to split my head wide open, and I needed a puff of the good stuff. They flagged me down. My grandmother was waving her arms around like windmills, but when my grandpa waved his hand waist high, well, how could I say no? He never asked me for anything. I had a soft spot. Maybe he could take away my headache. I pulled over. As they got in, my grandmother climbed right in the back and fell asleep. Her luggage was a plastic northern bag with a change of clothes in it, or maybe it was knitting and a pillow. I could smell the heavenly scent of fresh tan moose hide. My grandfather wasn't carrying anything except his little pipe, which he put in his front pocket before getting settled. Maybe this was only a day trip. a quick trip. He looked at me, shook my hand, smiled, and then fell asleep himself. I decided to drive and make the most of this. As we headed towards Yellowknife, I remembered that I had hidden a joint on the inside panel of the truck on the driver's side, behind some paperwork. I reached in and found it. Yes! I waited another 20 minutes, slowed down, lowered my window, and decided to light up. It was 4:20 somewhere. Long story short, my grandfather asked in Tlicho, "What smells like dirty socks?" I told him it was a cigarette from the United States. He told me to let him try. He was going to show me. To this day, I do not know what overcame me. I've always had a problem with sharing. Ask my sister. She'll tell you. I told Grandpa that he had to hold the smoke in his lungs. He did exactly that. And then he coughed, 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 which woke my grandmother up. She told us both we didn't know what we were doing. She was going to show us. My grandfather explained that these were the smokes that John Wayne used to smoke, and that you had to hold the smoke in, which she did before she coughed, coughed, coughed. All of this and no water in the vehicle. So we took turns hotboxing in my truck, and then we ended up entering the city by the airport. "I'm hungry," my Ehtsèe said. Grandpa said. "Me too." They both looked straight ahead. "KFC?" my grandmother asked. I nodded. I could afford KFC. For all of us, that's Kentucky Fried Chicken. The crazy thing, though, was when we arrived, my grandmother got the giggles. Then my grandfather got the giggles. Then I got the giggles. I wasn't stoned. I was buzzed, but this was so wonderful to see my grandparents laughing. When we walked into Kentucky Fried Chicken, they were laughing so hard that all the elders there started laughing. They'd never seen my grandparents laugh so hard in their whole lives. Even the cooks came out to look, and they started laughing. "What's so funny?" my grandfather asked. "Why am I laughing?" "I don't know," Grandma said. "I'm laughing too." I stood there in a garden of laughing elders. I should have taken pictures or a quick video, but the truth is, I just realized what I had done. I'd gotten my beautiful grandparents stoned because of my selfishness and stupidity. I felt horrible. It was then that I received a bank alert. Money for the whole month had just been deposited in my account with an apology from the Tlicho government. Somebody thought that this one department had paid me, but I was a new account. I'd fallen between the cracks. I was looking at more money than I had seen in my account in a good long while. And there we were in Kentucky Fried Chicken with my grandparents wiping their eyes and laughing. I decided right then and there that I'd quit smoking pot forever. I also decided to pay for the best weekend of my grandparents' lives, and it was. There was Kentucky Fried Chicken, Bingo, Walmart, A&W, the Fat Fox for coffee. My grandfather loved their scones, which he called baby bannocks, and he loved their coffee. Ehtsèe had tea, black tea with lots of cream. I insisted that they stay at the Super 8, and we did it all over again the next day with church, shopping, and more church before hitting the independent grocery store and driving back to Betchoko. As I dropped them off at the old folks' home in Betchoko and helped haul all of their groceries into their suite, I knew they'd be eating well for weeks if my uncles didn't clean them out first. After I loaded up their freezer, I felt my grandfather give my shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Masi cho," he said, "grandson." I'd never been so proud, and I decided to forgive myself for the marijuana incident. My mother found out about the KFC event and called me. She had spoken to my grandparents and then had gone to town on a research mission. My grandparents had left out the American cigarette information, but I suspected my mom suspected. She was the reason I knew in English what everyone at KFC was still talking about. A few months later, after a bout of pneumonia and a deep cough that he couldn't shake, well, we were all called to spend time with my Ehtsèe around his bed. A tough, bossy Tlicho nurse named Jennifer was there from the health center, checking up on both my grandparents. I was scared of her and intrigued at the same time. Jennifer wouldn't make eye contact with me, but she softened whenever she was around Ehtsèe and Ehtsèe. It was beautiful to hear them talking, Clicho, and they'd often laugh at inside jokes about things. Sadly, my uncles were still drinking. We could smell it on them. They were already grieving, but I was honored to be asked to take portraits at what became a family reunion. Cousins, aunts, great aunts, community, good food, lovely hymns, lots of laughter, hours of stories, which I recorded with permission, were there for me to start sharing as soon as I returned to my master computer in my little rented home in Betchoko. My grandfather asked to see my portfolios again. I had 10 different albums now that showcased my work. I left to go get them, and when I returned, everyone else had gone home to rest. It was just me, Jennifer, and my grandparents. Ehtsèe stirred. He was propped up on many pillows to ease the congestion in his lungs. My grandmother was asleep on the bed, all curled up under a comforter, holding his hand. In her right hand was his pipe. I ached now thinking I should have taken that shot, but I decided to keep it just for myself as a testimony of eternal love. Grandson, my Ehtsèe called me in a whisper. I knelt and held his hand. To my surprise, I found myself weeping. Grandpa, I whispered, Ehtsèe. He started speaking in Clicho, and I started to panic. Jennifer was in the room making tea. What? I said. What is it, Grandpa? Do you want me to translate? Jennifer asked. It was the first time she had looked at me. She looked directly into my soul. Yes, please. Do you have any of those John Wayne cigarettes? He asked me, with Jennifer translating. I shook my head. In late, I said, sorry. They stopped making them. Too tough for the people. Ehtsèe, he said. I could sure use one right now. I nodded. I know. Maybe just rest, sleep, dream. He looked up at the ceiling, and I wondered if this was it. He spoke and Jennifer translated. What do you think happened to that mushroom and that little boy? He asked. I was worried that if I didn't say something, we'd lose him. I motioned to Jennifer, and she sat down beside me and put her hand on my shoulder. To this day, I don't know what came over me. I used both of my hands to hold his. Ehtsèe, I think what happened was E.T. would come back to Earth time and time again to help that little boy as he grew. Like maybe Elliot had a reading disability, so E.T. used the power of the glow in his dark finger and healed the boy by touching his lymph nodes and his third eye. And then Elliot was a straight A student after that. No one could figure it out. How had back of the class gone right to the top? It was a miracle. Then Elliot grew up and he met someone very special and decided to get married. But he was worried that E.T. would miss out, so he and his sweetie decided to have a garden wedding with fireworks after, so that E.T. would know he was just fine, that he was no longer alone. And when Elliot was saying his vows and looking out at the crowd, really, he was looking for his little buddy made of mushrooms. And to his surprise, a whole bunch of ETs all started waving at him. And then there was his buddy too. Elliot started to cry. Through his tears, he could see all of the ETs raising their hands and all of their pointing fingers lighting up with radiant love and salutes, just like AC/DC when they sing for those about to rock. But it was for friendship and best wishes. So Grandpa, my beautiful Ehtsèe, I believe with all my heart that is what happened to the mushroom and the little boy who grew up to be a great father and a loving husband, and one day an Ehtsèe like you. I felt his hand fall away. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder, sending me strength. I looked up through my tears. My grandfather was snoring. Jeez, she whispered. I thought that was it. Thank goodness he hadn't passed while I was sharing a web of warmed up fibs. Thank you, I said, Mussy Cho. She went back to not looking at me. Are these photo books yours? She asked. Have a look, I said, yes. I went to make tea and could still feel the spirit of her hand on my back. We had 2 more days with my Ehtsèe, with the entire community praying, with many visitors stopping by. Jennifer translated for me and stayed with us, even during her downtime. I had a dream that second night. Jennifer was reaching around with one hand in a smoky room for a perfect line of light. She traced the light in the heart of her palm. Then I watched her walk barefoot into the snow with a little cross fox trailing her. She stopped and held her hand out, and the little fox came up and pressed its nose into her palm where the light warmed it. Jennifer looked back at me in the dream and smiled. When Ehtsèe passed, he sighed. I felt him pass through me as I held his feet and cried. Grandma cried, my mom cried, we all cried, even Jennifer. I believe that his dog was waiting for him, so happy to see him again. I believe they made their spirit trails through the Mackenzie Mountains to be with their families before attending the big feast in the sky. The night Ehtsèe passed, the power lines outside the church hummed under the pads of my moccasin feet as my spirit floated towards the highway. Grandson, a voice said, and I looked left. I couldn't see him, but I felt his presence. Let's fly, he said. We soared and flew north together. As we flew, we saw the trees getting smaller and smaller. We saw the mountains. Look, he said, and I did. Thousands and thousands of caribou were waiting. I could see little ones leaping, yearlings. It was like an ocean of antlers. They were so strong. When you hold your dreaming daughter, he told me, you bring her back here, show her. I promised that I would. Keep honoring the people, he said. I am so proud of you. And with that, I realized his voice was going up, and I soared above the caribou. Many of them looked up. I waved, but I flew to Fort Smith of all places. When I knew I should return to my body in Betchoko, I could see Fort Smith's water tower, the church, Kaiser's, the Northern, the drugstore. I could see Roaring Rapids Hall, aka Moccasin Square Gardens. The next morning, I awoke in my old bed in my loft in our log house. The smell in that house hit me like a brick. Drinking, hard drinking, sweat, old booze. As I climbed down the stairs onto the main floor, I saw bottles everywhere. People had been smoking in our house too. I was so mad it felt like someone was dragging a rusty fork back and forth across my soul. Patrick's jaw dropped when he saw me. He was cooking for some blonde woman. She was petite and smoking. No one was allowed to smoke in our house. The woman's hair was cut short. There were hickeys all over her neck. Holy shit, he said. The woman stood, tucking my mother's bathrobe tight. How did you get here? I looked around. The house was the same. I came in late last night, I bluffed, in town for work. He looked at his girlfriend, and she looked at me. She pulled the collar of my mom's housecoat up to cover Patrick's hickeys, but it was too late. We had all felt something drop in the room. The Fort Smither came out in me. I decided not to be fazed, to be polite, to bide my time and get to the truth. I'm Paula. Pleased to meet you, the woman said, and we shook hands. I bowed and said the same. Want some eggs and toast? Patrick asked, avoiding my eyes. He was blushing. I have bacon. Sure, I said. I realized I was starving. I should go, Paula said. She walked down the hall toward the room my mother had shared with Patrick for years. I looked over at the chair at the head of the table where my father's favorite shirt had always hung. It was gone. Patrick had promised us he'd always leave it there as a sign of respect. I knew my mom didn't have it. I went to Patrick and hugged him. He smelled rancid, booze sweat, perfume, vomit. This was a hug of goodbye. This was my father's house. He knew it. I knew it. Patrick had broken us now and forever. Want some coffee, he asked. Sure, I said. He poured it, and I took my cup. We sat quietly, the radio playing could never be loud enough to drown out the panic in the room. I'm sorry, he said finally as he raised his coffee to his lips. I'm sorry you came home to this. Me too. I'll move out tomorrow, he said. Underneath the couch, covered in lint and hair, I could see my father's shirt. I pulled it out, dusted it off, put it back where it belonged. Okay, I said. It was then that I got a shock. I felt my grandfather's pipe in my pants pocket, a divine gift. I would take out the pipe later, make a fire and drop tobacco into the flames and pray. For now, I stayed sitting at the table we had bought from Kaiser's right before my father passed. Patrick cooked in silence. I let him. Words would only get in the way. Underneath the table, I folded my hands together. How would I tell my mother what had happened, or should I? Shamans were secretive, I knew. They had to be. I could feel Jennifer's hand on my back, and my palms were already calling our dreaming daughter's name. Thank you, Masi Cho. Okay, Jonathan.
Thanks, Richard. That was a wonderful story.
Hoka, 7:56. Ooh, we got 4 minutes.
So we'll open it up to some questions. If anybody has questions for Richard, you can raise your hand and I'll acknowledge you, and then you can ask your question. We'll just have one person speak at a time, so once I acknowledge you, you can unmute to ask your question, and then I ask you that you'll remute yourself. I'm just going to check here and see if...
Oh, Patty K. Hamilton has got her hand raised. She's an investigative journalist. She's an author, wicked storyteller. Should we let Patty ask the $1 million question? She's going to sink the whole boat right now with one question. Ooh, I'm sweating.
Richard.
Yes.
Your stories are good medicine. Thank you. Thank you. An ocean of antlers. Wow.
Yep. Thank you, Patty K. Well, you are a superb writer, your own sweet self. You're living where I like to write about. You're already doing what I'm imagining. And it's lovely to hear your voice. I'm a huge fan. That's it. No question, no $1 million question that's just going to obliterate the whole.
No, we had Rebecca type in. She doesn't have a question, but she just wanted to thank you for the beautiful story.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rebecca. Oh, Lisa Webster.
Yeah, Lisa, you can go ahead.
I had a quick question. Is there an equivalent in, is it Chilo, or I didn't quite get how to say that, but it strikes me that you're very much a gentleman, and in the story, the character is very much a gentleman. Is there the same concept in your traditional language, in your traditional worldview, of the concept of gentleman?
Absolutely, yes. So I was just saying in a radio interview, when we were kids, we were so lucky to grow up in Fort Smith because Uncle Gabe's Friendship Center, my mom worked there. We had so many great leaders, and we really grew up with so many back to the land programs. There was Cubs and Scouts and Rangers and Venturers. And so I have all these pictures of us just going out on the land all the time with the late Laurie Hobart and Bernie Bergman. And I remember one time we were kind of caught in a storm as we were making our way in a winter camp, and we were all teenagers. I was there with the late Trevor Evans and Chris Heavyshield and Ashley Mabbitt, John Lee Jakew, my brother Raj, Sandy Schumann. And we ended up going into this trapper's cabin, and his lock for this cabin was just the stick in the what should have been a padlock. And so we popped this little stick out. We went in. All we had to do was drop a match in this potbelly wood stove, and we had our own food, and we must have stayed in there for maybe a couple of hours, and the storm passed. And as we were leaving, Laurie Hobart and Bernie Bergman got us to we had to redo everything. We ended up, I think we ended up cutting a bunch of wood, stacking wood. We left a couple cans of beans behind. We wrote a little note saying, thank you so much. You really saved us. But I remember Bernie Bergman left, he had these rainbow suspenders that we were always teasing him about, but he left them as a gift for the old man who owned this cabin, for just to show respect. And I remember saying to Bernie Bergman, I said, Bernie, what are you doing? I mean, we've cut all this wood, we've shoveled, you left some cans of beans, you wrote a note. We made it so that somebody else, if they have to come in, all they have to do is drop a match. There's all the kindling and newspaper and everything there. I remember we had to cut all this kindling for the next person. And he said, these are the words that changed my life forever. He goes, Richard, a true northerner leaves each person and each place better than they find them. And that really has been how I conduct myself ever since. And I think that Fort Smithers, I think that where we're from, we share what we have. We do our best. We're a kind people. I'm not so sure we're a forgiving people, but we do our best. And so thank you. That's a great question. More questions? This is fun. This is good visiting. Sarah Hodgkins, nice to see your name on there. Hope you're doing good in the United States. My dear friend, Sarah Hodgkins, one of Fort Smith's very own. I know you spent some time in Pine Point, but Fort Smith is always going to claim you. See if there's any other names. Oh, I see two more participants. Jonathan.
Unmute. Hello?
Hi.
Richard?
Yes.
Oh, hey, Annette here. Delightful. Thank you so much for sharing that beautiful story. My question to you is, you're a new father, and you have apparently found your way with gentle guidance from your grandparents and your parents, and you've found a correction in your life. As a new parent, not everybody always finds that correction in their life. And how would you suggest guiding our young people to the correct path without using corporal punishment?
That's a great question. So, alcohol has destroyed my family, and that it is eating my family alive as we talk. And it's destroyed our communities. As a guard for the RCMP, I saw what it was doing to some of the most beautiful men in our community. I actually lost some really dear friends, and certainly a lot of my blood relatives, to alcohol. So there's a reason that I don't drink, and it's because I just see what it's done and what it continues to do. We've lost everything because of alcohol as a family, and we continue to do so. So I made the decision quite young that I was never going to drink. I wasn't going to do drugs. I wasn't going to gamble. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to cheat. I was just going to live a good life, a gentle life. And I think that when you have a safe home and you've had so much taken away from you, and it starts with the language. We never had a chance to learn Tlicho Dene. We all had to learn French growing up in Fort Smith. And my mom went to residential school. She was taken when she was 5. She went for 12 years. She went to 2 different residential schools. And I think that my life has been about reclaiming our traditions, our customs, our language, anything that I get my hands on, whether it's old photos or old stories and digitizing them. I am reclaiming so much, not just for myself, but for my family, and you see me on Facebook every day. If there's anything that I can do to get people laughing, or if there's any way I can share some good news, I'm always happy to do so. And I see that with, my goodness, everyone from Fort Smith, but also in Yellowknife, you see people like Norbert Patra, or you look at Sandy Sanderson, like the real characters of the Northwest Territories. They, I think too, are in the same boat as I am, and that is life. There's so much to celebrate about being alive, and there's so much sweetness in the world. So Annette, to answer your question, my boy is 6. He's in 2 forest schools right now, so we're outside for hours every single day ever since this pandemic has started. And I just noticed that we're all so much happier outside, every single one of us. And I think that there's a key to that, that when you have a safe home, you got good home cooking, you're listening to CBC radio and Wind Speaker radio every day, you're cranking the tunes, you're reading great books. Annette, I'm a huge fan of yours. I get to read Patty K. Hamilton, I get to read Annette, I get to read some of the names on here as well. So I'm the happiest man that I know, and I think that translates, because I just want to be the best father and the best husband I can be. One thing about this pandemic that I've learned is I think it's ludicrous that I was hopping on a plane three times a month to go and tour. I think it was harder than my wife and my little boy let on. I've never, in 11 years that I've been with my beautiful wife, Kiwi Martin, I've never been home so much in that history. I find I'm more present now. If my boy wants to play Beyblades and Yu-Gi-Oh, let's play Beyblades and Yu-Gi-Oh. If my wife wants me to make a fire in our little fire pit on a Wednesday night for her goddess party, I can do that now. I don't have one foot out where, as a touring artist, I was gone mentally 2 days before I got on the plane. And when I'd come home, and I know, Patty, you know what I'm talking about, you'd come home and you'd be exhausted for 2 days, and then you'd have to do all the paperwork and invoicing. It was this hamster wheel of busy. And one thing I've learned from this, and I don't know if I'm answering your question, I never want to be that busy again. I want to be more present. I want to have fun. I really want to enjoy my life more than ever now, because I'm 49. No spring chicken anymore, boy. I'm a silver tip. Richard Mercury Sr. called me a silver tip last time he saw me. And that's a good reminder. The clock is ticking. So have fun and share what you have, and ask yourself, how do you want to be remembered? I want to be remembered as somebody who made people laugh and did his best, didn't take, didn't lie, didn't steal. That's how I want to be remembered. And so far, so good. Things are looking up. Masi Cho, good question, Annette.
Okay, we have a question Katie wrote in. Thank you so much for your time. She loved the talk. And do you have any advice for a shy Blackfoot writer with anger issues?
Yeah, good. I think that, you're shy, that they say if you're shy or you're nervous, it's because it matters. One thing they don't tell you in writing school is that you can write for revenge. So you are angry for a reason. And I think the greatest healing that I have ever done in my life for a lot of the stuff that happened when we were growing up is I wrote it out. I wrote it out. The Lesser Blessed was written from a place of revenge. It was really to avenge my cousin who left this planet far too early. We lost a cousin to suicide, and I didn't realize that when The Lesser Blessed came out, Larry's soul is really the main character of The Lesser Blessed. Larry's soul is really how I wish my cousin's life could have been. So if you're angry and you're shy, write about that, because underneath anger and rage is really fear. Write about that. When you read my short stories, The Contract or Blood Rides the Wind or Love Walks In, that really is about something that happened in Fort Smith when we were growing up. We had someone we all trusted molesting his own family members. And that broke us. That broke us as a community. And it touched us all, that kind of revulsion and shock and intrigue. And you can see in my short stories, The Contract and Blood Rides the Wind and Love Walked In, you can see me finding my way through that sense of betrayal, not just individual, but community betrayal, and a community trying to pick up the pieces. Or look at Dogwood Midnight Runners. We lost a dear friend of ours to suicide. And I really wanted to honor our dear friend in a really beautiful way, and not focus so much on the shame around suicide, the stigma and the taboo around discussing suicide. I really wanted to celebrate his life and his legacy, and I really wanted to address mental health. And so to the shy and angry writer amongst us, this is all soul ammunition to deal with why you're so angry. So write it out, scream it out, share that glorious truth of yours, because when you share that rage and that anger and that outrage and that disgust with something, you can bet that everyone reading it will say, yep, I've been there. Or you can say, if you write about the taboo of maybe elder abuse, you can have people reading it in any part of the world and go, that it happens here too. Thank goodness somebody's finally writing about it. So write from revenge, write that rage out. And I guarantee you'll always have a willing crowd of readers who go, thank you for your courage. Thank you for sharing. Look at Jesse Thistle from, his great biography, From the Ashes. You'd never think that everything that he'd been through, that he could still be alive, right? Or you look at Helen Knott in My Own Moccasins. You can't believe somebody that lost and on a blackout for so long could have turned her life around. Thank goodness people are writing these incredible, painful memoirs that are filled with such courage, because that could be the turning point for somebody who's lost, that they can read it and say, well, if they can do it, I'm going to do it. I always applaud people's courage. I always applaud people's honesty and their bravery. So I hope that helps, and I look forward to reading your writing one day.
Okay, we have another question that's been written in. Jacqueline asks, how long does it take to write a book in general?
Well, I'm different from everybody, but The Lesser Blessed took 5 years. I think about Little You took 2 minutes. I think about some of the short stories in Moccasin Square. I think Ehtsèe probably took about 3 months. Each one is different, and you cannot compare yourself to anybody else, because we're all students of the craft of writing from here on in. You're never a master. You're always learning. And if you're lucky, you get to meet the best editors. And those of you who want to be writers, you should all please start a writing group and surround yourself with writers you're genuinely terrified of, because they're so good. I just said to a friend, if you are the best writer in the room, you're not going to learn anything. But if you're with writers that you really care about and you're terrified, everything you submit should be the blood, sweat, and tears and marrow of all you have. That's the writing that I want to read.
Okay, it looks like Patty K has another question. She has her hand raised, so I'll unmute.
Here we go. Patty K, Hamilton, CBC. Here we go. Patty K, go easy now. Oh, maybe.
It's not letting us unmute her here.
Okay, maybe that's a good thing.
Unmute.
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Nobody has ever tried to mute me before. Okay. No, Richard, I just wanted to talk to you about film adaptations. And
Sure.
Lots of us, for the first time, got to see Eden Robinson's The amazing adaptation of Trickster. And you also had that experience with The Lesser Blessed. Mm-hmm. Can you describe a bit about what that feels like as the creator, the author of a story, to have it turned into a film, and what you have to back away from, give away, in order for that to happen successfully?
Well, I'll give you some gossip if everybody wants some North of 60 gossip. So a long time ago, I was shoveling dog manure at Joyce and Moise Rebesca's camp, Sanaji Quay, outside of Ehtsèe. I was a summer student there, and I literally was shoveling out a dog pen, and these were big dogs. And I remember my boss, Moise Rebesca, he came out and he said, "Van Camp." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Someone wants to talk to you. Make it quick." And he handed me this, he had this cordless phone and with the big antenna, some out of Wall Street. So I'm like, "Okay, sorry, boss." And I made my way. I shut the gate and I made my way, and I was wearing this bandana and I took it off, and the bugs were attacking me. It looked like I was moving. I was wearing a moving sweater. That's how much that the bugs were that bad. And he's like, "Make it quick. Gonna have to dock you. Gonna have to dock you for the phone call, Van Camp." I'm like, "I'm sorry, boss. I don't know why anyone would want to call me." And I was like, "Hello?" And it was Jordan Wheeler. And he says, "Richard Van Camp." I was like, "Yes." He goes, "Jordan Wheeler calling you from the set of North of 60 in Bragg Creek, Alberta. How'd you like to write for the show?" I said, "Okay, yes, please. Yes." And he goes, "Okay, when can you start?" I'm like, "Now. I can start right now." And Moise is going, "Make it quick. You got a time to lean, you got a time to clean, Van Camp. Start shoveling." And he goes, "All right, okay, you want to write for the show? Wagamis just quit." That was Richard the late Richard. "Wagamis just quit, so you can take his apartment." "Okay, yeah, so can we call you at this number?" I'm like, "Okay." And then 2 weeks later, I started writing for North of 60 as a writer trainee in Bragg Creek, Alberta. We were all living in Calgary. And Patty Kay, to answer your question, I learned that writing for TV is not just one person. You're writing with producers, you've got a guest director, the actors were walking in and they had a lot to share about the show, but you're working in a room filled with about 8 writers. And I learned I didn't care for that. You know, in that whole production, I was the only person born and raised in the Northwest Territories. I was working with, you know, great writers, but they were all from Toronto, or there's Jordan Wheeler from Winnipeg. Nobody had been in the North as long as I had, and I had the least amount of say. So to answer your question, I was reminded of something that I learned early on in my career, and that when you collaborate with someone, it really is a dance of trust. So whether you're working on a comic book, or you're working on a kid's book, or you're working on a movie, nobody wants to make something ugly or grotesque. Everybody wants to do their best, and your job is to let them shine. So, and actually get out of the way and let them shine. They were going to shine without you anyways. So, answer your question. It took me writing for North of 60 for a month and being a story consultant with them for 4 years. That really showed me the power of collaborating and really knowing my place in the grand scheme of things. And then working on the kids' books with the great George Littlechild, really just getting out of the way and letting him do what he was born to do, and that's create beautiful art. So when Anita Doran wrote to me, and I still have the email, and she said, I've just read The Lesser Blessed. I was up all night. You have to let me turn this to a feature film. I'm sensing a major Hollywood actor for one of the, you know, it was the email that changed my life forever. Anita Doran and myself and Christina Pivizon and everybody at First Generation Films in Toronto, that movie, The Lesser Blessed, was really 7 years of our life. And we were so lucky to work with Tony Rebeska. We were so lucky to work with the NWT Film Commission to get the movie made. So The Lesser Blessed, based on my novel, the movie, the feature film, which is also a CBC gem. You should be able to watch it for free on CBC. I think it's still up for free. That really was such a joy, because I really did nothing other than help the director, Anita Doran, whenever she wanted. It was her script, it was her show, it was her vision. She knew what she wanted to do. The movie is a perfect adaptation of the novel. There's nothing I would change. There's a couple little things that we had to edit for time. I wish that there was an extended cut. That's just me. So I really want to sing the praise of Eden Robinson, because her series Trickster is on CBC right now, courtesy of Michelle Latimer and her team. That was such a long journey to get that done. And it sounds like it's beautiful. We haven't seen it yet. We're saving it for a night when I can stay awake past 9 o'clock. But I want you to know that there's other great news about Eden, and that is we have just finished wrapping up, and we've already premiered the final cut of Monkey Beach. So I'm one of the executive producers for the adaptation of Eden Robinson's novel, Monkey Beach, which came out in 2000. If you haven't read it, I want everyone to read it. It's about a young Haisla woman named Lisa who can see spirits. She can see the dead. She doesn't want this gift. It's based in Kitimat. It's based in Vancouver. It's based on Monkey Beach, where there are sightings of a supernatural being. And the director is Loretta Todd. Loretta Todd has been working on this adaptation of, and I'm convinced this is another perfect adaptation of a novel. Loretta Todd had been working on that for 13 years, and it's brilliant. So Patty Kay, just to answer your question, to make a movie in Canada, it costs millions. I know Lesser Blessed was 2.2 million. I can't imagine what the Trickster series cost. It's a 6-part miniseries. I don't know how much Monkey Beach cost, but it just takes so long. But in my opinion, sometimes it's the years that it takes to make that makes it so well. So we also have another adaptation that's Three Feathers, based on my graphic novel with Crystal Mateus, or Neva Mateus, and the director is Carla Ulrich. Again, we knocked it out of the park because of the director, Carla. So to answer your question, to work on a movie or an adaptation, as the writer, as the author, my job is done. I'm merely there to assist the director and the producer to get them to do their best, to help them do their best. That's what I love doing. I love seeing people succeed.
Okay, it looks like we're running close on time here, so I'm just going to have one final question that somebody wrote in. Sylvia asks, what is the inspiration behind Moccasin Square Gardens, and can you summarize what the book is about?
Oh, great question. So Moccasin Square Gardens was my 24th book in 24 years. And I decided that going into it, I've written such, dark stuff with the lesser blessed, or I count myself among them, or the contractor loved walks in, or, some of the Betchoko stuff I'm working on is dark. And I've done the bullied story. I've done the bully story. I've done the father-son dynamic story. I sat down and I thought, wait a minute, we've done so much of what we wanted to do. I've written from revenge. I've done so much, I think, healing on a lot of stuff. And that will never end. That's a continual process. What if I just had fun? And what if I just started poking fun at us? I think Don Dumont and Drew Hayden Taylor are great at poking fun at ourselves as Indigenous people. And I thought, what if I just make fun of man babies? What if I make fun of bad leaders, lazy leaders? What if I ask the aliens to come down and help us? And what if I set all this in the Northwest Territories and really just make it a dance, like Moccasin Square Gardens? We go to dance at the Roaring Rapids Hall, also known as Moccasin Square Gardens. I wanted this to be a dance. So it took about 2 years, and that really was the inspiration behind it. And I think that of all my books, I think that Moccasin Square Gardens is by far the funniest. There are 2 very scary Betchoko stories in there, and there's 1 revenge story in there too. So I always like my short story collections to be a surprise. I don't want it to be funny all the way through. I want it to be jarring. I want it to be an experience. I want it to be a garden of terror and light at the same time. And, sometimes people say, I wish it had been funny the whole way through. Well, guess what? There is funny, in most of it, but I got to be honest, I love the dark stuff too. I'll always love the dark stuff. I guess I'm still a Sisters of Mercy goth head, in my heart. And I'm really proud of that. And I'm really proud to be from Fort Smith. I love honoring where I'm from. I love making Northerners laugh. I love making people blush. I love just wounding people with my work, where years later they're thinking about a character and wondering how they are. That I think is the mark of a successful book. And I'm so grateful to Douglas McIntyre and all my publishers and all my editors. And I'm grateful to everybody here tonight who spent a little time with us, with Grandpa Ehtsèe. And thank you for listening to me sing the spider song to you. Isn't that something? I don't think I ripped anybody up. I don't think I owe anybody any money. I think this was a really good party.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us for the first night of our fall reading series, Richard. It was a great night. I'd like to invite everyone. 2 weeks from tonight, we're going to have our second speaker. We're having Janie Chang, who has just written The Library of Legends. It's a historical novel based in China during World War II. So feel free to register at our website at lethlib.ca, and you can join us 2 weeks from tonight at 7 o'clock.
Right on.
Again, thank you very much, Richard.
Okay, that's the show. Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, everybody. Patty Kay, Sarah Hodgkins, Annette. Bless you all. Bless your families. I'm so grateful to you. Okay, go to sleep. Don't pick fights. Okay, good night.
Thanks, Lethbridge. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Lethbridge.
Thank you.